We all know BTS as global superstars with flawless performances, but what happens when the stage lights dim? Do you really know who they are behind closed doors? What if the one you thought was the softest is actually the absolute boss? Who secretly holds the group together, and whose bizarre hidden habits shocked the rest of the boys? Today, we are diving deep into the untold truth as BTS members expose each other's real personalities. Which revelation will leave you completely speechless? Ready? Number 7. RM, the mastermind who needs a babysitter. When you look at Kim Namjoon, known globally as RM, you immediately see the pillar of BTS, the towering intellectual with an IQ of 148, who fluently commanded the room at the United Nations General Assembly and single-handedly translated American interviews for his bewildered bandmates back in the chaotic breakthrough year of 2017. You see a man who writes deeply philosophical lyrics, a poetic soul who wanders through art museums to find peace, and a fierce rapper who has carried the heavy weight of the bulletproof concept since before they even debuted as a ragtag hip-hop group. But what happens when the cameras stop rolling, the blinding stadium lights go dark, and the members are left alone in their dorms or hotel rooms? According to the other 6 members who have lived alongside him for over a decade, the gap between RM, the flawless, untouchable leader, and Namjoon, the everyday human, is so astronomically huge that it borders on the absurd. Jin, the oldest member of the group, has relentlessly exposed RM's complete inability to perform basic everyday survival tasks, famously stating that looking after Namjoon is like taking care of a giant, extremely intelligent toddler who doesn't know how the real world works. Have you ever wondered how a certified genius can be so hopelessly, dangerously clumsy? The members fondly and exasperatedly call him the god of destruction for a very literal reason. Suga has hilariously recounted times when RM would simply borrow a pair of sunglasses and somehow snap them in half without even trying, or break expensive stage props just by grazing them with his fingertips during a music video shoot. Jimin once exposed in a live broadcast that RM bought a whopping 33 pairs of Apple AirPods because he just kept losing them on flights, in cars, or simply walking down the street, a fact that left fans both highly amused and totally baffled. How does the man who meticulously organizes the complex sonic structure of a Billboard-topping album lose 33 pairs of wireless earphones? But beyond the comedic relief of his legendary clumsiness lies a much deeper, more emotional vulnerability that the members have bravely shared with the world over the years. Behind that stoic, reliable leader facade is a young man who constantly crumbles under immense anxiety, overthinking, and crippling self-doubt. J-Hope, who is often considered the secondary shadow leader of the group who manages their performance discipline, has spoken extensively about the invisible, crushing pressure RM carries every single day. J-Hope pointed out that while RM is the face of the group's intellect and global diplomacy, he is also the primary shield who absorbs all the hate, criticism, and terrifying pressure of paving the way for K-pop on a completely unprecedented global scale. V has emotionally shared in documentaries that there are long, quiet nights when RM looks so incredibly exhausted, staring blankly into space in the waiting room as the weight of the world crushes his shoulders. And in those silent moments, the members realize that their fearless leader actually needs them to survive just as much as they need his guidance. Jungkook, the golden maknae, who famously joined Big Hit Entertainment simply because he saw RM rapping and thought he was the coolest person on earth, has confessed that seeing RM struggle behind the scenes, watching him pace back and forth nervously, muttering to himself before massive stadium shows or high-stakes international TV appearances, humanizes his lifelong hero in a way that makes his respect and love for him grow exponentially. The members playfully but seriously expose that RM is not just some unbreakable machine built for success. He is highly sensitive, overthinks every single word he posts on Weverse or Twitter, and often beats himself up for days over a minor, barely noticeable mistake during a live concert performance. In reality, the dynamic of BTS is a beautiful trade-off. The members protect RM from the ordinary world because RM fiercely protects them from the extraordinary madness of the music industry. They cook for him when he forgets to eat, they help him find his lost belongings, and they constantly remind him to stay grounded. Remember the absolute chaos of Bon Voyage Season 1 in Northern Europe, where RM literally had to be sent home early because he lost his passport in a foreign country? The members still tease him relentlessly about it, using it as prime ammunition whenever he tries to act too cool or authoritative. They expose how he goes Namjooning, riding his bicycle, looking at crabs and talking to plants as a desperate coping mechanism to escape the suffocating reality of being a global megastar. Suga, who has been with RM the longest since their underground days, noted that RM has transformed from a fierce, angry teenager trying to prove himself in the hip-hop scene into a wise, nature-loving philosopher, but his core clumsiness and pure innocence have never changed. This massive exposure of RM's true personality flips the script entirely on what the world thinks it means to be a strong leader. True leadership, as exposed by the BTS members, isn't about projecting a flawless image of perfection. It's about being brave enough to lead even when you are fundamentally flawed, endlessly clumsy, and secretly terrified of letting everyone down. Could you carry the wild dreams of 6 other brothers, a massive company, and millions of passionate fans worldwide while struggling to even keep track of your own phone? The members know deep down that without Kim Namjoon, there is absolutely no BTS, but they also want the world to vividly know that without the members constantly looking out for him, Kim Namjoon might literally walk into a glass door and break his own nose. His dual nature, the brilliant, eloquent, silver-tongued diplomat versus the bumbling, endearing boy who destroys everything he touches, is exactly what makes him so profoundly relatable, lovable, and utterly irreplaceable to his bandmates. Are you truly shocked to realize that the mastermind behind BTS's greatest historical achievements is actually the member who needs the absolute most babysitting on a daily basis? This staggering juxtaposition is wild, yet it paints a stunning picture of a modern brotherhood where weaknesses are not ridiculed or hidden away, but fiercely protected and embraced. As we peel back the intricate layers of this global icon through the unfiltered eyes of his closest friends, we uncover a beautiful, fragile humanity that makes you want to root for him even more. This isn't just about a wealthy pop star who loses his earbuds. This is a deeply inspiring story of a genius who sacrificed his own peace of mind to elevate his team, a man who built a global empire but relies heavily on his 6 best friends to help him navigate the absolute simplest aspects of daily life, proving once and for all that even the most monumental, life-large figures in our modern world are at their core beautifully human. Number 6. Jin, the jokester who secretly carries the heaviest tears. When you hear the name Kim Sok-jin, known to the entire globe as Jin, the very first image that instantly flashes into your mind is likely a ridiculously gorgeous man confidently throwing aggressive flying kisses to a screaming stadium of 60,000 fans, shamelessly introducing himself as worldwide handsome in every single foreign interview, and laughing at his own notoriously terrible dad jokes with a high-pitched, squeaky sound that the members hilariously compare to a frantically wiping windshield wiper. For years, the public and casual viewers have easily boxed him into this very specific, entertaining role: the comedic relief, the mood maker, the slightly dramatic oldest brother who acts like the youngest, and the unabashed visual center who never seems to take himself too seriously. But what if I told you that every single bit of that loud, outgoing, endlessly confident persona was originally a complete fabrication, a deliberate and agonizingly difficult sacrifice made by a quiet, introverted boy just to keep his younger brothers from falling apart? According to the other 6 members of BTS who have fiercely exposed the shocking duality of Jin's true personality over the years, the massive gap between his loud television persona and his real raw self is one of the most heartbreaking and deeply inspiring secrets of the group. RM, the leader, who often carries the intellectual weight of the band, has emotionally exposed on multiple occasions that Jin is actually the most sensible, mature, and quietly serious member of the entire group when the cameras are finally turned off. RM confessed that in traditional Korean culture, the oldest member holds absolute authority and power, which could have easily created a suffocating, strict, and terrifying environment for the much younger teenagers in their cramped, sweaty trainee dorms. Instead, Jin made a conscious, incredibly selfless decision to completely throw away his pride, deliberately shatter his own dignity, and act foolishly just to establish a horizontal hierarchy where his younger brothers would never feel afraid to speak their minds, joke around, or challenge the status quo. Have you ever stopped to think about how much mental strength it takes to purposely make yourself the punchline of every joke so that others can feel safe and comfortable? Suga, who is only 3 months younger than Jin and shares a profound, silent bond of understanding with him as the 2 eldest, has bluntly exposed that Jin is secretly the emotional anchor who pulls the entire team out of the darkest pits of depression. Suga revealed that while other members might cry, vent, or loudly express their frustrations during grueling tours, Jin quietly internalizes his own pain, always smiling and cracking a joke to instantly dissipate the heavy, suffocating tension in the room, never once allowing his own exhaustion to burden the rest of the team. But perhaps the most shocking revelation about Jin's true personality comes from Jimin, V, and Jungkook, who have tearfully exposed the unbelievable, almost terrifying work ethic that Jin desperately tries to hide from the world. You have to remember the factual, undeniable background of Kim Seok-jin. When he was scouted by Big Hit Entertainment simply for stepping off a bus looking like a movie star, he was an acting major at the prestigious Konkuk University with absolutely zero background, zero training, and zero natural talent in singing or hip-hop dancing. He was thrown into a ruthless, cutthroat survival environment surrounded by underground rap prodigies like RM and Suga, and street dance champions like J-Hope. For the first few years of BTS's career, Jin was constantly paralyzed by the crippling fear that he was nothing more than a pretty face who was dragging his incredibly talented brothers down. How did he cope with this terrifying imposter syndrome? The members exposed that Jin would wait until everyone else was dead asleep in their tiny dorm, sneak back into the freezing dance studio, and brutally practice the same choreography routines for hours upon hours until his body practically gave out, often secretly enlisting the help of their choreographer or J-Hope just so he wouldn't be a liability on stage. Yet, whenever he was praised for his massive improvements, Jin would brush it off with a joke, fiercely guarding his image as the effortless guy because he fundamentally believes that fans should only see their happiness and hard work, never their blood, sweat, and tears. Jungkook, who joined the company as a shy, terrified 15-year-old, has repeatedly credited his entire upbringing to Jin, exposing how the oldest member would drive him to school, buy him meals with his own meager allowance, and physically drag him out of his intense homesickness by relentlessly teasing him until he laughed. Jin practically raised the golden maknae, feeding him, scolding him, and protecting him from the harsh realities of the idol industry. And when you look back at the monumental, emotionally devastating 2018 Mnet Asian Music Awards, where BTS won Artist of the Year, it was Jin who boldly took the microphone and fearlessly exposed to the entire world that the group had suffered such severe mental breakdowns earlier that year that they had seriously considered disbanding and walking away from it all. While the other members immediately broke down sobbing at the mention of this deeply guarded secret, Jin stood tall, his voice shaking but resolute, taking the absolute hardest task upon himself to speak their painful truth so his younger brothers wouldn't have to. The members know that Jin is a master of compartmentalization. He wrote the heartbreaking solo song Awake to confess his deep-rooted insecurities about never being able to fly as high as the other members, yet he still pushes himself every single day to be their strongest shield. Once, V mentioned that when things get too serious and the pressure of being the biggest band in the world feels like it's literally crushing their chests, Jin will randomly start a ridiculous argument or do a bizarre dance just to snap them out of their anxiety, proving that his legendary humor is not just a personality trait, but a highly calculated, deeply loving survival mechanism for the entire group. This profound exposure completely shatters the illusion of the one-dimensional funny guy and reveals a man of staggering emotional intelligence, immense self-sacrifice, and quiet, unyielding resilience. Number 5. Suga, the savage rapper who secretly loves the hardest. When you first lay eyes on Min Yoongi, the razor-sharp lead rapper and genius producer universally known to the world as Suga, you might instantly and understandably assume he is the most unapproachable, intimidating, and brutally cold-hearted member of the entire group. For years, the global media and even casual fans have aggressively painted him with a very specific solitary brush, the grumpy grandfather of BTS, the unapologetically savage lyricist who ruthlessly roasts his own bandmates without batting an eyelash, and the chronically exhausted introvert whose frequently stated life goal in his next reincarnation is to simply be a motionless rock. If you only watch their highly edited, bite-sized variety show clips or read his blistering, venomous rap verses as his explosive alter ego, Auguste D, it is remarkably easy to believe that this man is built entirely of ice and absolute indifference. But what exactly happens when the formidable, impenetrable walls of this tough, underground hip-hop veteran are violently torn down by the very members who have lived, bled, and cried beside him for over a decade? Prepare yourself for a staggering reality check because the BTS members have relentlessly exposed a shocking truth about Suga that completely and utterly shatters his icy exterior, revealing him to be the ultimate tsundere, a popular Japanese term for someone who appears hostile, aloof, and cold on the outside, but is secretly bursting with an overwhelming, almost heartbreaking amount of warmth and desperate affection on the inside. Have you ever seriously wondered what it actually takes for a hardened street rapper to secretly morph into the silent, fiercely protective mother figure of a global pop sensation? J-Hope, the eternal sunshine of the group and Suga's self-proclaimed soulmate, has fiercely exposed on numerous occasions that Yoongi's supposed indifference is nothing more than a brilliant, agonizingly shy facade designed to carefully hide how deeply and intensely he cares about every single breathing soul in that chaotic dorm. J-Hope famously recounted a deeply emotional, tear-jerking story from their bleak, terrifyingly uncertain trainee days in 2013 when he was left completely alone in their cramped, freezing dorm on New Year's Eve, feeling utterly abandoned, physically sick, and profoundly homesick while the other members went home to their families. Suddenly, without warning, the dorm door swung open and there was Suga, casually holding a bucket of hot fried chicken, having secretly and deliberately abandoned his own rare family gathering because his heart simply could not stand the agonizing thought of his younger brother spending the holidays completely alone in the dark. He didn't make a grand cinematic speech, he just shoved the chicken into J-Hope's hands, looked away awkwardly to avoid any emotional eye contact, and quietly sat with him in comfortable silence. This signature move, intensely taking care of the members without ever making eye contact, smiling, or demanding a single ounce of gratitude, has become a legendary, endlessly amusing joke among the band. Jimin has hilariously exposed how Suga will completely ignore them during a loud, chaotic dinner, pretending to be annoyed by their existence, but will silently slide a perfectly opened water bottle, a carefully peeled piece of fruit, or a perfectly grilled piece of premium meat onto their plates while staring blankly at the wall, simply too embarrassed to verbally express his immense affection. But beneath these endearing, deeply amusing quirks lies a staggering, harrowing history of agonizing sacrifice and severe physical trauma that the members have bravely helped bring to the glaring light of the public. You have to aggressively remember the brutal, unforgiving origins of Min Yoongi back in the tough streets of Daegu. He was a literally starving underground producer who sold his meticulously crafted beats for absolute pennies, often having to make the excruciating daily choice between buying a cheap bowl of noodles for dinner to survive or paying for the bus ride home. When he finally made it to big hit entertainment, fighting against his own parents' fierce disapproval of his musical dreams, his desperate struggle did not magically end. He secretly worked dangerous late-night shifts as a motorcycle delivery boy to pay his own high school tuition, leading to a horrifying rainy-day traffic accident that completely shattered his shoulder. RM, who weathered the most brutal, humiliating early criticisms alongside Suga when underground hip-hop purists viciously attacked them for selling out to become heavily makeup-wearing idols, has profoundly exposed the immense, suffocating psychological burden Suga carried as the primary musical architect of BTS's most raw, socially conscious, and controversial albums. While the world sees a millionaire rock star today, RM and the other members painfully remember the deeply depressed, anxiety-ridden young man who would lock himself in his dark, claustrophobic studio, aptly named the Genius Lab, for days on end, refusing to eat or sleep, agonizing over every single beat and lyric until his fingers bled, just to fiercely ensure his brothers had the absolute best music to protect them from the ruthless, highly manufactured K-pop industry. Perhaps the most deeply shocking and profoundly emotional exposure of Suga's true personality came directly from V and Jungkook, the youngest members, who tearfully revealed a behind-the-scenes incident that completely paralyzed the entire massive fandom with its sheer, unexpected vulnerability. During the grueling, mentally devastating 2018 World Tour, when the members were suffering such severe psychological burnout that they were actively sobbing in their hotel rooms, terrified of the massive global pressure and seriously contemplating disbanding the group forever, V received a shockingly long, deeply emotional text message from Suga. For a notoriously blunt man who famously replies to urgent, desperate messages with a single highly annoyed syllable, or simply ignores them entirely for weeks, this was already a massive, universe-altering anomaly. But the contents of the message left V completely broken down in heaving sobs, at the very end of the lengthy, heartfelt text intensely expressing his own deeply hidden fears and his unwavering, eternal support for his younger brother. The famously stoic, supposedly emotionless Min Yoongi had typed the impossible words, "I love you." Jungkook also tearfully revealed he received a similar incredibly emotional message, and when V boldly exposed this massive secret during a televised dinner party broadcast, the entire table erupted into absolute chaos, with Jin and Jimin screaming in pure, unadulterated jealousy because they had never, ever received an "I love you" from Suga in their entire 7 years of knowing him. Suga's pale face instantly turned red, burying his face in his hands, completely and utterly mortified that his ultimate, most closely guarded secret, that he loves his members with a fierce, agonizing, world-ending intensity, was now broadcast to the entire universe. The members relentlessly tease him about it to this very day, bringing it up whenever they want to playfully torture him, but they also fiercely and soberly acknowledge that those 3 simple words from their toughest, most emotionally guarded brother were the absolute, exact, literal lifeline that pulled them back from the absolute brink of permanent destruction. But the astounding exposures don't just stop at dramatic text messages. The members have vividly painted a highly entertaining picture of Suga as the ultimate domestic caretaker, a role that hilariously and aggressively contradicts his hardcore chain-wearing rapper persona. During their healing reality shows like In the Soup or Bon Voyage, while the other members are chaotically running around playing in the mud, losing their passports, or accidentally starting terrifying fires in the kitchen, who is the one quietly standing over the hot, blazing stove for hours on end? It is always Suga. Number 4. J-Hope, the eternal sunshine who secretly rules with an iron fist. When you hear the explosive, universally recognized chant of "I'm your hope, you're my hope, I'm J-Hope," you immediately and naturally envision the blindingly radiant, perpetually smiling energy pill of BTS, Jungkook. For the entirety of their history-making, record-breaking career, the global media, the massive fandom, and casual viewers have enthusiastically and comfortably placed him securely inside the brightly colored box of the Happy Virus, the human sound effect machine who effortlessly lights up every single variety show with his ridiculously loud laughter, exaggerated reactions, and dramatic physical comedy. You see a man who wears vibrant streetwear, makes adorable heart shapes with his entire body, and genuinely seems like he does not have a single aggressive, cynical, or negative bone in his physical being. But what if the very members who stand beside him on stage completely shatter that vibrant, colorful illusion and boldly expose a reality that is far more intimidating, complex, and astonishingly intense? According to the rest of the BTS members, the staggering, almost unbelievable gap between the cheerful Hobie on television and the relentless, iron-willed Captain Jung behind the scenes is the most terrifyingly effective dynamic that actually holds the entire group together. RM might be the official, public-facing leader of BTS, dealing with the heavy intellectual and diplomatic duties of the group, but every single member, including RM himself, has repeatedly and fearfully exposed that J-Hope is the true, undisputed shadow leader who rules their physical performances and daily discipline with an absolute, uncompromising iron fist. Have you ever seriously wondered how 7 young men with completely different backgrounds, wildly varying levels of physical coordination, and absolutely zero sleep managed to execute the most aggressively complex, mathematically precise choreography in the history of pop music, while singing live in massive stadiums? It is solely and entirely because they are utterly terrified of disappointing Jungkook. Jin and V have hilariously but genuinely complained on multiple live broadcasts about the dreaded, infamous J-Hope gaze, a chilling, dead-eyed, unblinking stare that Hoseok instantly shoots at them through the dance studio mirrors the exact millisecond someone misses a beat, fumbles a minor step, or breaks their synchronized formation. V once emotionally exposed that out of all the incredibly high-stakes, nerve-wracking things they do on a massive global scale, absolutely nothing sends a colder, more paralyzing shiver down his spine than hearing J-Hope quietly sigh and click his tongue in disappointment during a grueling late-night practice session. Jimin, who himself entered the company as a fiercely competitive top-tier contemporary dancer and shared a cramped dorm room with Hoseak for many years, has profoundly exposed that J-Hope's terrifying strictness is absolutely not born out of arrogance or a desire for power, but out of a desperate, agonizing sense of responsibility to keep them all alive and relevant in a ruthlessly cutthroat industry. You have to aggressively rewind to the gritty, unglamorous origins of Jung Hoseak in his hometown of Gwangju, where he was already a legendary, battle-hardened underground street dancer known as Smile Hoya. When he first arrived at Big Hit Entertainment, he was suddenly thrust into a chaotic, messy room with brilliant underground rappers like RM and Suga, and vocalists like Jin who literally could not bounce to a simple hip-hop beat. The members deeply exposed that J-Hope, who initially signed on to be a vocalist and had absolutely zero knowledge of hip-hop or rapping, voluntarily took on the suffocating, immense burden of physically training his wildly uncoordinated members, meticulously breaking down complex street dance techniques into agonizingly repetitive drills for hours upon hours until their feet literally bled and their lungs burned. The most heart-wrenching, foundation-shaking revelation about J-Hope's true importance to the group was dramatically exposed by the members detailing a dark, desperate moment before they even debuted, back in the highly uncertain days of 2012. Hoseak, utterly exhausted, heavily burdened by the group's massive lack of progress, and severely doubting the nearly bankrupt company's uncertain future, made the devastating decision to pack his bags, leave the dorms, and quit BTS forever. Jungkook, who was just a fragile, terrified teenager at the time, openly sobbed in his arms, desperately begging him to stay, while RM boldly marched straight into the executive's office and staked his entire career on the line, vehemently demanding that Big Hit bring Hoseak back because, as RM stated, without J-Hope, BTS simply cannot exist. This profound, highly emotional exposure completely redefines who J-Hope is to the world. He is not just the main dancer, he is the absolute, irreplaceable physical and spiritual core of the team. But carrying that massive, structural weight takes a devastating psychological toll that he fiercely and silently tries to hide behind his blinding trademark smile. Suga has thoughtfully and cautiously pointed out the crushing, almost toxic paradox of Hoseak's self-appointed stage name. By introducing himself to the universe as J-Hope, he fundamentally locked himself into an agonizingly high-pressure, lifelong contract to constantly be the unbreakable pillar of positivity for the members and the fans, completely stripping himself of the basic human right to be publicly tired, angry, or depressed. The members have emotionally shared that when J-Hope is finally drained, when the cameras are completely shut down and the massive adrenaline of the stadium tours finally evaporates, he completely shuts down, retreating into a quiet, heavily guarded, incredibly serious shell that looks absolutely nothing like his hyperactive television persona. Norman noted that Hoseak is actually one of the most wildly cynical, hyper-organized, and coldly objective members of the group when it comes to the brutal reality of business and survival, analyzing their live performances, their music charts, and their career trajectory with the ruthless, calculating precision of a seasoned CEO. He is the one who strictly polices their chaotic schedules, constantly reminding the members to maintain their physical stamina, deeply scolding them when they slack off on their diets, and silently pushing them past their absolute breaking points when they feel like they can no longer move a single muscle. Yet, despite his terrifying strictness and unyielding perfectionism, he is also the member who most deeply and profoundly cares for their fragile emotional well-being behind the scenes.
Jimin tearfully exposed that whenever he falls into a dark, suffocating pit of self-hatred over a minor vocal mistake, it is always J-Hope that quietly enters his room in the dead of night, bringing a warm meal or a drink, and patiently sits with him for hours, silently absorbing all of Jimin's toxic anxiety until the younger member can finally breathe again. The world easily sees a happy-go-lucky dancer who creates viral social media challenges and wears bright aesthetic clothing, but the members deeply see a relentless, fiercely loyal military general who literally dragged them from the dirt of a tiny, unknown agency to the absolute glittering pinnacle of global musical supremacy. They deeply and passionately want you to know that J-Hope's blinding positivity is not some naive, naturally born trait. It is a highly calculated, intensely difficult choice that he violently forces himself to make every single morning, swallowing his own immense stress, fears, and physical exhaustion, just so his 6 brothers can have a safe, brightly lit path to walk on in a terrifyingly dark industry. When you finally grasp the sheer, agonizing magnitude of his carefully hidden sacrifices, the terrifying power of his daily discipline, and the quiet, heavy burden of being everyone's eternal hope in a world that is so relentlessly demanding, it makes you incredibly desperate to know who is the one standing quietly in the shadows to give hope to J-Hope when his own brilliant light inevitably begins to fade. This staggering, magnificent duality of Jung Hoseak, the terrifying, uncompromising dance captain who simultaneously functions as the group's most tender, bleeding heart, shocks absolutely everyone to their core, proving once and for all that true power isn't about how loudly you can command a room, but about how fiercely and selflessly you are willing to burn yourself out just to keep your found family warm.
Number 3. Jimin, the angelic fairy who secretly harbors the most terrifying ambition. When you hear the name Park Jimin, universally adored and instantly recognizable as the mesmerizing lead vocalist and main dancer of BTS, your mind immediately conjures the breathtaking image of an ethereal, incredibly delicate fairy who moves across massive stadium stages with the breathtaking, effortless grace of a swan. For the better part of a decade, the massive global fandom and the international media have safely and overwhelmingly categorized him as the ultimate soft boy of the group, the resident angel with a blinding eye smile, cheeks that perfectly resemble soft rice cakes, and a heart so agonizingly tender that he is practically known as the official on-call emotional therapist for the other 6 members whenever they are in severe distress. You watch the beautifully edited variety shows and the heartwarming tour documentaries, and you constantly see Jimin warmly wrapping his arms around a sobbing Jungkook, deeply listening to V's midnight anxieties, or playfully giggling at Jin's terrible dad jokes with a high-pitched, melodic laugh that instantly melts hearts worldwide. But what if the very members who have shared cramped, freezing dorms and massive, echoing stadium stages with him completely and utterly shatter this one-dimensional, flawless, angelic illusion, boldly exposing a breathtakingly intense reality that is far more intimidating, ferociously competitive, and astonishingly dark? According to the incredibly candid, often fearful confessions of his own bandmates over the years, the staggering, astronomical gap between Jimin the soft fairy and Jimin the relentless, iron-willed perfectionist is one of the most terrifying, deeply awe-inspiring secrets in the entire history of BTS. RM, the highly intellectual leader who has watched Jimin closely since his terrifyingly uncertain trainee days, has profoundly and seriously exposed that beneath Jimin's incredibly soft, sweet exterior lies a burning, ravenous, and almost deeply terrifying ambition that absolutely eclipses everyone else in the room. Have you ever seriously stopped to wonder how a boy from Busan, who was originally classically trained as a top-tier contemporary dancer, managed to completely reinvent his entire physical structure and vocal cords to become a hardcore hip-hop idol in a shockingly, unbelievably short period of time? You absolutely must remember the brutal, agonizingly stressful factual background of Park Jimin. Unlike the other members who had years to carefully prepare, Jimin was the very last member to join Big Hit Entertainment, arriving from his prestigious arts high school in Busan with a terrifyingly brief training period of barely 6 months before the group's highly anticipated debut. He was abruptly thrown into a deeply established, fiercely competitive brotherhood of seasoned street dancers and underground rappers, immediately feeling utterly inadequate and completely terrified that his highly elegant contemporary dance style made him stick out like a sore thumb in a hardcore, aggressive hip-hop group. The members have emotionally and vividly exposed that during those desperate, suffocatingly bleak pre-debut months, Jimin was literally fighting for his absolute life as the company executives repeatedly and ruthlessly tried to kick him out of the final debut lineup a staggering 8 times. How did a deeply insecure, constantly criticized teenager manage to survive that level of immense, crushing psychological torture? Jin and Jungkook have tearfully exposed the almost horrifying, inhuman work ethic that Jimin adopted just to desperately cling to his fading dream. They revealed that Jimin would brutally force himself to stay awake, sleeping a meager, highly dangerous 2 to 3 hours a day, obsessively locking himself inside the freezing dance studio until the early hours of the morning, relentlessly practicing a single minor dance pop or vocal run thousands upon thousands of times until his body literally gave out and he collapsed onto the hard wooden floor in a pool of his own sweat and tears. Jungkook, who was widely known as the naturally gifted prodigy of the group, confessed that seeing Jimin violently push himself far past the very limits of human endurance completely terrified him, fundamentally changing his own perspective on what hard work truly meant. But this terrifying, deeply agonizing pursuit of perfection did not magically disappear once BTS achieved immense global fame. It only grew into a highly dangerous, intensely self-destructive obsession that severely worried the older members behind closed doors. Jin famously and emotionally exposed during a live broadcast how Jimin, in a desperate, deeply misguided attempt to strictly fit the toxic, unforgiving visual standards of the K-pop industry during their iconic Blood, Sweat and Tears era, viciously starved himself, eating only 1 tiny meal a day for 10 agonizing days, while simultaneously undergoing grueling hours-long choreography practices that demanded immense physical energy. Jungkook, who was widely known as the naturally gifted prodigy of the group, confessed that seeing Jimin violently push himself far past the very limits of human endurance completely terrified him, fundamentally changing his own perspective on what hard work truly meant. But this terrifying, deeply agonizing pursuit of perfection did not magically disappear once BTS achieved immense global fame. It only grew into a highly dangerous, intensely self-destructive obsession that severely worried the older members behind closed doors. Jin famously and emotionally exposed during a live broadcast how Jimin, in a desperate, deeply misguided attempt to strictly fit the toxic, unforgiving visual standards of the K-pop industry during their iconic Blood, Sweat and Tears era, viciously starved himself, eating only 1 tiny meal a day for 10 agonizing days, while simultaneously undergoing grueling hours-long choreography practices that demanded immense physical energy. Jungkook, who was widely known as the naturally gifted prodigy of the group, confessed that seeing Jimin violently push himself far past the very limits of human endurance completely terrified him, fundamentally changing his own perspective on what hard work truly meant. But this terrifying, deeply agonizing pursuit of perfection did not magically disappear once BTS achieved immense global fame. It only grew into a highly dangerous, intensely self-destructive obsession that severely worried the older members behind closed doors. Jin famously and emotionally exposed during a live broadcast how Jimin, in a desperate, deeply misguided attempt to strictly fit the toxic, unforgiving visual standards of the K-pop industry during their iconic Blood, Sweat and Tears era, viciously starved himself, eating only one tiny meal a day for 10 agonizing days, while simultaneously undergoing grueling hours-long choreography practices that demanded immense physical energy. Jungkook, who was widely known as the naturally gifted prodigy of the group, confessed that seeing Jimin violently push himself far past the very limits of human endurance completely terrified him, fundamentally changing his own perspective on what hard work truly meant. But this terrifying, deeply agonizing pursuit of perfection did not magically disappear once BTS achieved immense global fame. It only grew into a highly dangerous, intensely self-destructive obsession that severely worried the older members behind closed doors. Jin famously and emotionally exposed during a live broadcast how Jimin, in a desperate, deeply misguided attempt to strictly fit the toxic, unforgiving visual standards of the K-pop industry during their iconic Blood, Sweat and Tears era, viciously starved himself, eating only one tiny meal a day for 10 agonizing days, while simultaneously undergoing grueling hours-long choreography practices that demanded immense physical energy. Jungkook, who was widely known as the naturally gifted prodigy of the group, confessed that seeing Jimin violently push himself far past the very limits of human endurance completely terrified him, fundamentally changing his own perspective on what hard work truly meant. But this terrifying, deeply agonizing pursuit of perfection did not magically disappear once BTS achieved immense global fame. It only grew into a highly dangerous, intensely self-destructive obsession that severely worried the older members behind closed doors. Jin famously and emotionally exposed during a live broadcast how Jimin, in a desperate, deeply misguided attempt to strictly fit the toxic, unforgiving visual standards of the K-pop industry during their iconic Blood, Sweat and Tears era, viciously starved himself, eating only one tiny meal a day for 10 agonizing days, while simultaneously undergoing grueling hours-long choreography practices that demanded immense physical energy.
Number 2. V, the eccentric visual who secretly holds a genius mind. When the name Kim Tae-young, universally celebrated and globally recognized as V, echoes through the massive sold-out stadiums of the world, it instantly conjures a breathtaking, almost intimidating image of absolute, unparalleled perfection. For years, the international media, luxury fashion houses, and the massive dedicated fandom have easily and comfortably placed him on an untouchable pedestal, labeling him as CGV because his flawlessly sharp facial features literally look like computer-generated graphics, praising his deeply resonant, soulful baritone voice and obsessing over his notoriously eccentric, highly unpredictable, and famously quirky 4D personality. You constantly see a man who effortlessly breaks the internet just by posting a blurry selfie, a fashion icon who confidently rocks high-end designer suits while walking barefoot, and a mysterious, aloof artist who famously gets completely lost in foreign countries during travel shows with a ridiculously calm, unbothered smile on his face. But what exactly happens when the very members who have closely shared every single meal, stage, and hotel room with him for over a decade brutally and completely shatter this one-dimensional, flawless, cool guy illusion, boldly exposing a staggering reality that is far more deeply layered, intensely emotional, and surprisingly genius? According to the highly candid, deeply reflective confessions of his older members, the astronomical, mind-bending gap between Taehyung, the clueless eccentric, and V, the highly observant, emotionally brilliant mastermind, is one of the most delightfully shocking secrets of BTS. RM, the highly intellectual leader who famously struggles to understand anyone who doesn't operate on strict logic, has profoundly and emotionally exposed that for the first few years of their grueling career, he genuinely thought Taehyung was either acting weird on purpose or just completely out of his mind. But as time passed, RM tearfully confessed that he was entirely wrong. Taehyung simply possesses a highly elevated, profoundly unique genius mind that operates on a completely different emotional frequency than the rest of the world, seeing breathtaking, invisible beauty in the most mundane things and effortlessly solving deeply complex emotional problems with a single, incredibly simple, out-of-the-box perspective. Have you ever seriously stopped to consider the deeply grounding, incredibly humble factual background of this global superstar? You absolutely must heavily remember the raw, unglamorous origins of Kim Taehyung. He was not a city boy trained in elite academies. He was the innocent, deeply naive son of a poor, hard-working farming family in the rural, heavily agricultural town of Gochang. He famously and genuinely believed his ultimate destiny in life was to simply pull weeds and harvest crops on a quiet farm, completely content with his humble life. He only traveled to the big hit entertainment auditions purely to support a friend, wearing a cheap, heavily worn-out jacket that his mother desperately bought for him so the city kids wouldn't bully him, only to accidentally catch the sharp eye of the casting directors and change the trajectory of his entire life forever. But his entry into the group was marked by a deeply traumatizing, highly agonizing period of extreme isolation that the members have bravely helped expose to the world. For a grueling, heartbreaking year, the company heavily forced Taehyung to be the hidden member, strictly forbidding him from appearing in the group's highly popular pre-debut vlogs, forcing him to literally hide in the dark, cramped corners of the room while his 6 brothers excitedly filmed themselves and built a fan base. Taehyung tearfully exposed that he used to secretly record his own solo vlogs alone in the freezing dorm, pretending he was talking to fans, only to sadly delete them because he was absolutely terrified that the company would ultimately cut him from the final debut lineup and just send him back to the farm. This deep-seated, highly agonizing fear of being left behind or abandoned fundamentally shaped his entire intensely clingy personality, creating a young man who absolutely refuses to ever let his brothers go. Jimin, his self-proclaimed soulmate, who famously fought with him over a plate of highly controversial dumplings in a massively dramatic dispute that literally almost broke the group apart, has profoundly and emotionally exposed the deeply hidden, staggering depth of Taehyung's emotional intelligence. While Jimin is known as the group's therapist, he tearfully revealed that whenever his own toxic anxiety and crippling self-hatred completely overwhelm him, it is always Taehyung who quietly steps up, completely dropping his eccentric, playful facade to deliver the most brutally honest, deeply grounding advice, famously telling Jimin, "I cannot take your pain away, but I can stay right here and cry with you." Suga, the notoriously cold and distant rapper, has hilariously but genuinely exposed how Taehyung's utterly relentless, completely shameless affection was the singular force that forcefully dragged him out of his dark, isolated shell, revealing how the younger member would stubbornly force his way into Suga's locked studio, completely ignoring his angry protests, and literally demand to be hugged until the older man finally gave in. Jin, the oldest member, has deeply reflected on how Taehyung dramatically taught him to stop constantly worrying about strict Korean age hierarchies and simply enjoy life, exposing how V would randomly drag him out in the rain to aggressively dance in the middle of the street, forcefully reminding the heavily burdened older brother what it feels like to just be a wild, carefree kid again. But perhaps the most deeply harrowing, profoundly shattering revelation about Taehyung's true personality was intensely exposed during their massive 2016 world tour, when he bravely took the microphone in front of tens of thousands of screaming fans and completely broke down in heaving, uncontrollable sobs, revealing that his beloved grandmother, the woman who literally raised him on the farm for 14 years, had tragically passed away. The members were deeply, utterly shocked because Taehyung, the very member known for never hiding his loud emotions, had completely and fiercely hidden this devastating, world-ending tragedy from everyone for weeks, silently carrying the crushing, agonizing weight of his immense grief all by himself, while actively promoting a massive comeback album with a bright, fake smile, because he absolutely refused to ruin the team's momentum. This profound, highly emotional exposure completely shatters the lighthearted, heavily manufactured image of the unpredictable alien and reveals a deeply sensitive, fiercely loyal young man of staggering emotional strength and quiet, unyielding resilience. He is the brilliant, highly observant chameleon of BTS, who actively chooses to play the role of the careless, free-spirited eccentric because he knows it constantly brings endless laughter and deep stress relief to his overworked, highly anxious bandmates. When you fully and comprehensively understand the immense, deeply hidden sacrifices, the terrifyingly deep emotional intelligence, and the quiet, heavy burden of being the misunderstood genius who constantly acts like a fool just to make his found family smile, it makes you incredibly desperate to re-watch every single moment of their history with fresh eyes. This staggering, deeply awe-inspiring duality of Kim Taehyung, the flawlessly beautiful, globally celebrated fashion icon who is secretly just a deeply loving, deeply scarred farm boy desperately clinging to the only family he has ever truly known in the chaotic city, proves once and for all that the most profoundly beautiful minds in the world are very rarely the loudest, but rather the ones that quietly and secretly operate on a frequency of pure, unadulterated love that the rest of the world can barely even begin to comprehend.
Number 1. Jungkook, the invincible prodigy who secretly cries for his brothers. When the entire globe hears the name Jungkook, instantly hailed as the unparalleled golden maknae of BTS, they immediately envision an absolutely invincible, god-tier prodigy who effortlessly dominates absolutely everything he attempts. For the past decade, the international media, music critics, and tens of millions of fans have comfortably and safely placed him on an untouchable pedestal of sheer perfection, marveling at a terrifyingly talented young man who can sing with angelic stability while executing bone-crushing choreography, rap flawlessly, direct music videos, paint masterpieces, and shatter global streaming records without breaking a single drop of sweat. You constantly see a heavily tattooed, fiercely confident global superstar who boldly takes center stage at the FIFA World Cup and dominates the Billboard Hot 100 with his solo pop anthems, radiating an intimidating, unbothered aura that makes him look completely invincible. But what exactly happens when the 6 older members who literally raised him from a fragile, severely introverted child completely and utterly shatter this flawless, superhuman illusion, boldly exposing a staggering reality that is far more deeply heartbreaking, intensely vulnerable, and astonishingly pure? According to the highly emotional, deeply protective confessions of his older brothers, the astronomical, mind-bending gap between Jungkook, the untouchable pop god, and Jungkook, the fiercely loyal, emotionally fragile youngest brother, is the single most deeply guarded, beautiful secret of the entire group. RM, the highly intellectual leader whom Jungkook famously idolized so much that he rejected 7 massive top-tier entertainment companies just to follow him to a nearly bankrupt agency, has profoundly and tearfully exposed that beneath Jungkook's heavily tattooed, muscular exterior lies the absolute softest, most fiercely empathetic heart in the entire universe. Have you ever seriously stopped to consider the deeply terrifying, agonizingly high-pressure reality of essentially sacrificing your entire childhood and fundamental identity to become the ultimate weapon for a massive pop group? You absolutely must heavily remember the raw, unglamorous origins of Jungkook. He arrived in Seoul as a terrified, painfully shy 15-year-old boy who literally could not speak to the other members without bursting into tears, famously waiting until all 6 older boys were dead asleep in their cramped dorm before he would quietly sneak into the bathroom to shower because he was absolutely terrified of interacting with them. He had 0 life experience, 0 friends in the massive city, and absolutely 0 sense of who he was as a human being outside of the grueling, suffocating walls of the dance studio. The members have emotionally and vividly exposed how they basically had to parent him, with Jin famously driving him to high school, packing his lunches, and forcefully dragging him out of his intense homesickness, while J-Hope and Jimin painstakingly taught him to dance, and RM carefully guided his intellectual growth. But this highly unique, completely unprecedented upbringing created a deeply complex, highly agonizing emotional paradox within Jungkook that absolutely terrified the older members. During a deeply harrowing, profoundly shattering late-night meeting in 2016, when the group was suffering severe exhaustion, the older members were casually discussing their physical hardships, expecting the usually quiet youngest member to nod along. Instead, Jungkook completely and utterly broke down in heaving, violent sobs, shocking the entire room into absolute silence as he tearfully exposed his greatest, most devastating fear. He famously cried out, "I do not care about the exhausting schedules. I do not care about my body breaking down, but seeing you guys, my hyungs, struggling mentally and not being able to do anything to help you, that is what literally kills me." This profound, world-altering revelation completely shattered the older members, fundamentally realizing that Jungkook did not possess a normal, separate ego. His entire emotional foundation, his entire universe, was completely and entirely tethered to their happiness. Suga, who is notoriously unbothered, openly wept at this confession, profoundly exposing that Jungkook's solo song, Begin, was literally born from this exact, devastatingly beautiful realization that he fundamentally believes he is nothing without his 6 brothers. Furthermore, the members have deeply and constantly exposed the almost suffocating, deeply terrifying pressure Jungkook heavily places on himself to maintain the flawless Golden Maknae title. While the world thinks he is naturally perfect, Jimin and V have tearfully revealed the dark, agonizingly stressful behind-the-scenes reality, where Jungkook will completely lock himself in a dark room and sob hysterically if his voice cracks for even half a second during a massive stadium concert. He viciously punishes himself for the tiniest, completely unnoticeable mistakes, heavily burdened by the crushing fear that if he fails as the main vocalist and absolute center of the group, he will inevitably drag his beloved brothers down into total ruin. Jin has frequently and fiercely scolded him for this highly toxic perfectionism, deeply exposing how Jungkook will physically push his body so far past the very limits of human endurance during live shows that he frequently requires oxygen tanks and medical attention backstage, yet he will fiercely refuse to cancel a performance, purely driven by a terrifying, unrelenting willpower to protect the group's flawless legacy.
The members want the world to deeply understand that his countless tattoos, which heavily shocked the conservative K-pop industry, are not acts of rebellion, but deeply personal, permanent reminders of his love for his fans, his members, and his music, literally wearing his profoundly soft heart on his sleeve for the entire universe to judge. Yet this terrifying, almost self-destructive drive for absolute perfection remains the undisputed baby of the group, who still deeply relies on the older members for his most basic emotional survival. The members hilariously but genuinely expose that no matter how massive his muscles get, how many global music awards he violently sweeps up, and how intensely he commands millions of people on stage, he is fundamentally the exact same deeply naive, wide-eyed teenager who constantly needs constant validation and warm affection from his youngs. He will aggressively dominate a massive stadium stage for 3 hours like an absolute rock god, only to immediately run backstage, trip over his own feet, and whine loudly for J-Hope to praise him for doing a good job, or boldly hide behind RM's massive shoulders the exact second an English interviewer points a microphone at him. This staggering, immensely complex exposure of Jungkook's true personality forces us to completely reevaluate everything we deeply thought we knew about the resident golden boy of BTS. He is not just a highly manufactured, naturally gifted pop machine programmed for absolute global domination.